In the hushed chamber of the Supreme Court, where every word carried the weight of precedent and consequence, Justice Clarence Thomas leaned back in his chair with a faint chuckle. It wasn't the first time he had reacted in such a way during a heated exchange, but on this day, the timing and target of his amusement would spark a moment no one expected. Across from him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, called upon to present an argument tied to one of the most contentious cases of the year. Her voice carried the rhythm of conviction, her words sharp, deliberate, and unflinching. Yet as she pressed her point, Thomas let out that low laugh, a sound that seemed to dismiss her line of reasoning without words. For a brief instant, the room froze. Senators, aides, and clerks turned their eyes to Crockett, waiting for her reaction. Some thought she might ignore it, pressing on with her well-prepared statement. Others wondered if she would bristle, stumble, or falter under the weight of the justice's seasoned confidence. Instead, Crockett stopped mid-sentence, lifted her eyes directly to Thomas, and let silence linger. That pause itself became electric, calculated, commanding. When she finally spoke, her words came colder than marble. With all due respect, Justice, I'm not here for your amusement. I'm here because millions of Americans deserve answers that your decisions directly affect. If laughter is the best you can offer, perhaps it explains why so many question the integrity of this court. The gasp that followed was not just from the audience, but from the very air of tradition that filled the chamber. Few dared speak to a sitting justice that way, fewer still with such composure. Thomas's faint smile stiffened, his chuckle dying in his throat. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, didn't grandstand. Her cold response carried the kind of authority that could only come from being both fearless and fed up. She leaned back slightly, folded her hands, and continued as though nothing had happened, her arguments flowing stronger now, every point sharper, every word echoing in the silence Thomas had left behind. By the time she finished, there was no trace of amusement in the justice's expression. The chuckle that began as a dismissal had instead become a defining moment, a clash of power where Crockett, against all odds, had shifted the balance. She hadn't just shut him down, she had reminded the entire chamber that even the highest seat in the land was not beyond accountability. The air in the chamber remained thick after Jasmine Crockett's icy retort, and the silence that followed was not just silence, it was a statement in itself. Clarence Thomas, who had so casually chuckled as if dismissing her entire argument, found himself caught in the middle of a room that suddenly no longer bent to his stature. The weight of her words had settled over everyone, from the clerks scribbling furiously in the back rows to the lawmakers who now shifted uneasily in their seats. Crockett had effectively reminded them all that the robes of power did not shield anyone from accountability when faced with raw truth spoken fearlessly. The moment wasn't about the law anymore. It was about respect, integrity, and whether the people watching from across the country could still trust that those who judged them were not laughing at their struggles. Crockett pressed on without acknowledging the ripple she had caused. Her eyes remained steady on her notes, but her voice had sharpened, like steel drawn from its sheath. Every sentence became a blade, cutting through layers of legalese, exposing contradictions, and dismantling the facade of neutrality that Thomas had attempted to maintain. It wasn't just an argument anymore, it was a declaration that she would not be minimized, belittled, or reduced to an afterthought in the conversation. She spoke of communities that had suffered because of rulings that stripped away protections, of families broken by decisions that ignored their lived realities. Her voice carried those stories into the chamber, forcing even the most indifferent to reckon with the humanity behind the laws. What made her response so devastating was not just the coldness of her words, but the control with which she delivered them. Many in her position might have lashed out emotionally, raising their voice or breaking composure, but Crockett did neither. She spoke with calm authority, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. Her tone was steady, unwavering, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment her entire career. And perhaps she had. For years, voices like hers had been dismissed, interrupted, or laughed at. But in that instant, she turned dismissal into exposure, revealing just how fragile the pretense of superiority could be when confronted with unapologetic truth. Thomas, for his part, sat motionless, the chuckle that once seemed effortless now a weight around his neck. His eyes shifted only briefly, as though searching for a way to reassert control, but Crockett had already taken the room. No one was looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. And in a chamber where power was supposed to be distributed in carefully drawn lines, that shift was seismic. Even the other justices, who had long mastered the art of stoicism, could not hide the flicker of unease that passed across their faces. They knew what had just happened. A challenge to authority had not only been made but had landed with such precision that it silenced one of their own. As Crockett continued, she layered her arguments with precision, building momentum that grew heavier with every point. She cited precedents, not as distant history, but as living proof of how decisions made by the court had real consequences. She invoked names, places, and dates, grounding her reasoning in undeniable reality. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that this was not merely a legal dispute, it was a confrontation with the very culture of dismissal that Thomas had embodied in that laugh. By the time she neared her conclusion, Crockett's words no longer sounded like an argument in defense of her position, they sounded like a verdict against the arrogance of those who thought themselves untouchable. Then came her closing line, delivered with the same icy restraint that had first frozen the room. She turned back toward Thomas, her gaze steady but not vindictive, and said, "History will remember whether this court laughed at the people, or whether it listened to them." The sentence dropped like a stone into still water, sending ripples that would extend far beyond the chamber walls. It wasn't just directed at him, it was directed at every person in the room, at every justice who would deliberate behind closed doors, at every American watching who had ever wondered if their struggles were taken seriously. The effect was immediate. Reporters sitting in the back scrambled to capture her words, their fingers tapping furiously on keyboards as they realized they were witnessing a defining moment. Cameras, though barred from directly recording the proceedings, would soon spread her words across headlines, broadcasts, and social media. The clip of her cold response would be repeated, dissected, and analyzed, becoming a symbol of defiance against institutional condescension. For Crockett, it was not just a personal victory, it was the kind of moment that transformed reputations, elevating her from a strong advocate to a national voice unwilling to be sidelined. As the hearing wound down, the tension did not dissipate. Even as procedural matters were addressed, the chamber still felt suspended in the gravity of what had just occurred. Crockett gathered her notes slowly, deliberately, as if to make clear that she wasn't retreating but concluding on her own terms. The aides who had accompanied her exchanged quick glances, their expressions a mix of awe and pride. They knew they had just watched something historic. On the other side, Thomas remained seated, still composed, but with an uncharacteristic heaviness that betrayed the sting of being publicly disarmed. He had faced countless arguments over decades on the bench, but few had left him as exposed as this one. The aftermath stretched far beyond the chamber. News outlets ran headlines that juxtaposed Thomas's laugh with Crockett's reply, framing it as a clash between dismissal and defiance. Clips of Crockett's words trended online, shared by supporters who hailed her as fearless, and even by critics who grudgingly admitted the power of her delivery. Commentators debated whether her cold response crossed a line, but none could deny its impact. It was rare for a justice to be confronted so directly, and rarer still for that confrontation to resonate with such clarity among the public. Behind the scenes, whispers filled the halls of power. Some aides expressed concern that Crockett had jeopardized future relationships with the court. Others argued she had done exactly what was needed, piercing through layers of decorum that too often shielded the powerful from scrutiny. For Crockett, the choice had been simple. She knew the risks, but she also knew the weight of silence. To let that chuckle go unanswered would have meant accepting dismissal, and that was something she had vowed never to do, not for herself and not for the people she represented. In the days that followed, Crockett's response became more than a moment, it became a narrative. It was framed as an emblem of accountability, of refusing to let even the highest seats of power trivialize the voices that challenged them. Thomas's chuckle, once a passing gesture, was now remembered only in contrast to the strength of the answer it provoked. And for Crockett, the confrontation was not the end of her fight but a reminder of why she fought in the first place, to ensure that when the powerful laughed, the people did not lose their voice in the echo.